So, this vlog is dedicated to speaking on my experience on the alternative spring and summer break program trip to Ghana this summer with Howard University. It's taken me a long time to kind of really get to making this last vlog. Every time somebody asks me about my trip, I immediately go into like just talking about how life changing it was. So I'm really excited to finally like share this experience in a video vlog because I think it'll be really helpful like in terms of processing. So I'll get right into it. We did something every single day while we were there in Ghana. The group that I went with, we stayed for 2 weeks, and it was life changing. Like that's the only word that I could really think of to think about my experience and my time when I was there. And although I may not touch on everything that was in this video, I want to talk about um, the parts of the trip that really stuck out to me. And so the reason why I chose to go to Ghana has a lot to do with my leadership and my background in terms of my schooling and everything like that. So this year I will be serving as the president of the Black Student Union at Cal State Long Beach. So ever since I came to Cal State Long Beach, like I was really interested in being a part of BSU and being able to see the Black leaders on campus um, really involved and like seeing Black students in roles where they were self-sufficient and like trying to create things and programs and stuff like that to really help foster bonds and nurture relationships within the Black student community on campus was really important to me. And through being a part of BSU has given me the opportunity to talk to different people and meet different people from different Black and African people from different parts of the continent, different states. And so early on when I joined BSU, I learned the importance of Africa and thinking in an African-centered context. So when I heard that there was an opportunity to visit the continent, like ever since I was a freshman, like I wanted to go on this trip, and so I was really excited that I had this opportunity this summer to go. And a lot of my context and reasoning why I was going to Ghana, I learned through the Black Student Union and through the ideals and the principles of Pan-Africanism. And so two reasons that I really wanted to go to Africa and to Ghana specifically, aside from finally visiting, the motherland and visiting this place that, we've been reading about, we've been discussing in BSU in our dialogues, and finally getting to experience the continent firsthand and the people and the culture there. Aside from that, I really wanted to go to inquire about land and businesses. I want to be a business owner anyways, but I went there with the idea of wanting to be culturally immersed, but also see how I can play a part in impacting not only the Ghanaian community there, but just Black and African people as a whole. So that was like my mind frame going to Ghana, and I think it really did help me kind of put a lot of things into perspective and help me reconcile with a lot of like the history that I had been learning through BSU about Africa and like different leaders and things like that. And so when we first got there, we visited the University of Ghana, Legon, and we had a lecture on the transatlantic slave trade, which set the tone for our whole trip. And then the next day we got to be in a student forum with Ghanaian students that went to the University of Ghana. So we were in a room, and like on one side was the Ghanaian students, and on the other side was us from Cal State Long Beach and Howard University. And it was like, it was just like a breath of fresh air. Finally, in a moment where we were all the conversations as Black and African American people in the United States having these discussions about Africa and like slavery and like wondering what the people in Africa actually think about like the way in which their condition in the world that they live in is perceived. We got an opportunity to like interact with those people firsthand. So that was very like therapeutic and really just exciting to like just have a conversation finally in person where we kind of our differences and our understanding of different things were met. So that was our first couple of days. And after just like those 2 days alone, I was like, oh my God, like it was so surreal to just even be in Africa. It was so surreal to just be in, finally there, like I said, on the continent, everything like that. One thing I do, and I know that will take me with me forever, will be when we visited Cape Coast, which housed the largest. It's called a slave castle, but it's a dungeon. The largest slave dungeon, where um, the the Ghanaian people that were taken and sold into slavery were housed for, I believe the tour guide said, for 3 to 4 months at a time, until the ships came over so that they could take them to the United States and everything like that. And so before we got to Cape Coast, we did visit an area. I'm blanking on like the region it was in, but we did visit an area where we visited the slave river, or the last slave bath. I can't remember what it was actually called, but the slave river, where we got background that prefaced us visiting Cape Coast. And when we went there, our tour guide that was there was telling us about how at that point we had been 4 hours from the main city we were staying in, which was Accra. And he was explaining that when the transatlantic slave trade had started, the slave masters would, take people from Accra, or just imagine like taking them from Accra and then walking in chains of like 200 to 300 Ghanaian people sold into slavery, walking up into this point that was 4 hours by car. So that alone was just like nerve, just really frustrating to like listen to, and thinking about people walking for like days at a time with little to no water, no breaks, and things like that. And so he was explaining that they would walk to this point, and a lot of and at the time there was a lot more wildlife because there was a lot more forest, so there was a lot more leopards and bears. And one thing that really resonated with me and kind of served as like a shifting point at that point in the trip, was when he was talking about the wildlife that was there. They would often feed off the line, or a lot of times they would feed off the slave masters since they would be at the front of the line. And a way in which the slave masters had found to kind of to remedy them losing their own lives was choosing the slave, or the person that they thought was the weakest in the line, tying them to a tree and leaving them for the animals to feed off of, so they wouldn't go for the slave master that was leading the line and everything like that. And that to me really, really stood out, and really made me angry, and thinking about like the relation, or I guess more so thinking of the animals as being a symbol, in that like their lives meant more than the African people or the Ghanaian people that were being brought through this traumatic experience. So after we visited the slave river and learned about the history there, it really provided a shift in me that I felt like it was, I'm learning to become less and less fearful of common things in my life, or obstacles and things that I face. But I really left there really thinking about fear and thinking about how much or how like insignificant it is, or like some of my fears are compared to the traumatic experience that our ancestors had to endure, just even up until that point. And so that really um, set a tone and a preface for what we were going to experience an hour later, when we got to Cape Coast and visiting the slave dungeons. And that in itself was just extremely emotional, and it was extremely like just so surreal again to having had all these conversations, with my peers, in my community on campus, my friends from school and things like that, about our history, and like hearing these speakers and things like that talk about it. It was like a moment where like I was finally facing all the things that I knew was true, but hadn't never seen it and touched it for the first time. So it was really surreal to be on the same ground. I know in one of the castles, some of the ground hadn't been redone, so it was literally the same ground that our ancestors had bled on, had slept on, had been piled on in that small space with a little to no air or ventilation, food being sparse, nowhere to use the restroom. When you think about women and like their menstruation and their cycle, like all that was happening there. And again, these are African people, these are Ghanaian people from different tribes, so different languages are being spoken, not having or not being able to fully communicate with each other and understand each other. um, that was just really, it was just like a lot of emotion, that I was going through, and a lot of just just like a lot of emotion that I was experiencing at that time. And one thing that one identity, that I'd say that I've was always kind of struggling with, during my time in BSU, and when I first came to BSU, was my religious affiliation. And I was born and raised Catholic, but having visited the dungeons and, even learning what I learned in BSU, it was a lot that I was questioning about my religion, more so from the history aspect and what it was used for, um, those Black and African people that were sold into slavery. And so at the dungeons, there were churches that were built there. And those were another place, that was a primary place when the transatlantic slave trade had started. That was a place where they housed the missionaries to spread Christianity. So, not in the Elmina Cape Coast slave dungeon, which is the largest slave dungeon in the entire world. Um, but the other slave dungeon that was across, the way from it, I can't remember the name of it right now. But the other dungeon, um, the church that was built at that dungeon was built directly on top of the male dungeon. So the women and the men were separated when they were in these dungeons. So the male dungeon that was held there, the church that was built directly on top of that dungeon. So literally when, the Dutch, and the Portuguese were having their mass ceremonies and things like that, like you could hear the slaves, and the men underneath them screaming and begging for help, and like weeping and crying and things like that. You could smell the odors coming up, and to me it was a moment of, it was in that moment that I realized that if there was ever a moment of me wanting to, um, experience spirituality, or in that way through Catholicism or Christianity, like it was kind of lost, and I felt like it was bittersweet. I think that was something that was really important for me to experience, since, religion was a really big part of my upbringing with my family and where they're from. But I felt like it was really bittersweet. It was one of those things that I felt like, um, although I was born with, or I was raised with, and that was a really important part of me, an important part of my life growing up, and it led me to, God, and, providing me morals and values and things like that. It was something that I felt like I could finally let go, and, experience or allow myself to experience spirituality and connecting to God and my roots in a whole different light. Something that, far removed and attached from um, something that was used to as a tool of oppression and to oppress, Black and African people. So that was another pivotal part in the trip, and really, just again, it changed it just, I don't know how to explain it. Just, it provided a whole new strength within me that I thought like I couldn't have if I wasn't Catholic, or felt like I'd be condemned for if I didn't practice this faith. But I felt very confident in in moving forward from that, having had experience like the true history of where or how it was used and brought upon Black and African people. So that was Cape Coast, and I would say those were primarily the two biggest, I think, the biggest parts of the trip that really was very pivotal for me. And I think and I believe that, like, most importantly, visiting Cape Coast and visiting the slave dungeons is so important, specifically for Black people in America, because the history that we learn of our ancestry and who we are as Black people starts as slavery in this country. So I thought that was I feel like that's something that every Black person in America specifically should experience and needs to experience in order to really grow and really, begin to discover who they are, and where we come from. Other things that we did on the trip were we sorry, I'm like thinking about it, but other things we did on the trip was so this was a service learning trip, and we visited 3 different schools, which was really rewarding. My favorite school, again, I'm blanking on the name, but my favorite school that we visited was the elementary school in Jamestown. And Jamestown is a really big slum in Ghana. So a lot of the students there, actually the school that was built there was, we didn't get a chance to meet the man who built the school, but we were told by his staff that the school was built entirely by him for the kids that were going there, with their uniforms fully paid for, food being provided, books being provided. The resources that they had were provided to the kids that were going there at no cost, because they lived in such an impoverished area. So it was just really beautiful to just see those students light up when they saw us, and it just really felt like, I don't know, like it just felt kind of like I could see like our ancestors through them. Just really happy that we were returning home. And one thing that really stuck out to me and what made that school my favorite was like these children were literally just like, they're like, madam, can we take your phone? Can we like record you? So they were taking our phones and recording us and taking pictures of us the entire time while we were programming with them and everything like that. And it just showed me that, like, and there were some good like photos and videos, like better than I could ever take. And I was just like, these kids need cameras. Like, I was just like, I feel like there's like a passion for filming this. And so it was just really incredible to just see children, just small kid, like Black and African kids, just like be passionate about something, and like had, if there was an opportunity for us to provide a camera to them, like who knows what, stories they'd be sharing and everything. So visited the 3 schools and did service at those schools where we did programming and everything. So that was really rewarding. We took 2 different boat rides. Took a boat ride down the Volta region where we saw one of the major dams that provided 40%, of that particular region of Ghana's electricity. So that was beautiful. And I was just thinking like that entire time, like in the places where we were visiting, there was just so much beauty and it's just so much like fruitfulness of the vegetation and just the water and like everything that they show us about Africa in America is like it's just like for that to be the only story that's like centered on was just crazy to me. And I was just thinking like people always choose to go to vacations to these places to like different countries and stuff like that, and everything that you would need for a vacation is right there in Africa. So I feel like as black people, as black people that feel like we can't visit Africa because we're so stuck on the stereotypes that we see is so crazy, and it's just so sad that we're limited by that. But I got to see like the beauty of it, and having known obviously like about like resources and stuff like that we had or that Africa has and stuff like that, and being a little bit more aware um, about like politics played with like their particular resources and stuff of their land. To me, looking at that was just like I was just really happy to finally see it. Like it wasn't something that I was shocked about. I was just like of course, and it was just beautiful. So I will say though, another thing too that I thought was ironic was I love being in water. Um, I I'm a Cancer, so I'm a water sign and everything. And after having visited the Slave River and having visited Cape Coast, it was really hard for me to see the water the same for a little bit while I was there. I was actually really put off by the ocean, and it wasn't in a way of like disgust or anything like that, but of like you know what the water represents in terms of slavery and stuff like that. But it was really, I just felt like I was thinking about water, and I felt like it was so destructive, and thinking about like slavery and thinking about like some of our ancestors who drowned themselves going to the water. Like it was really hard to look at the water the same and feel like I don't explain it. Like it was just really hard to look at the water the same after having experienced that. Like I felt like water was so destructive, and I was just like, we say water is just it provides life, and I was just thinking about water just being so destructive at the time. But it was another uh, friend of mine on the trip that she actually told me, she was like, I kind of was feeling that too, but I actually kind of looked at the water and I was, really just studying the waves, and I kind of just was thinking about like our ancestors, the way in which like a certain wave had pulled in. It looked like our ancestors were kind of trying to grab us and reach us and pull us in. So that really made me think about, again, bring back all those feelings that I felt about water and everything, and just about like it serving as a symbol of like our ancestors pulling us in and them being one with the water and stuff like that. So it was just really moving. It was very emotional um, trip and and all that. It was just it was incredible. Last thing I'll mention, sorry, is that um, before going to Ghana too, I had a very idealistic view and very I would say naive view of thinking about like I'm gonna go to Africa, I'm gonna go to Ghana, and every African is gonna be culturally aware. It's gonna be you know F colonizers and just like I thought that's what I was gonna be walking into, and the same way in which here in America we have as black people, a lot of us don't know our history or where we really come from and how powerful we really are as a people because of our history. It's the same thing that was in Ghana. So I was discouraged by it, but it was brought back into reality to me from a young woman that we met named Stacy, she's Ghanaian born but lived in the UK and then moved back and everything. So she had, been teaching in the UK for years and everything like that. But she really did bring it into reality and saying like, there's the life here is there's a lot of problems here in Ghana as well. There's people that they treat there's some Ghanaian people or restaurants you'll go to where they'll treat the Lebanese people or the white people or the Indian people better than they'll treat the African person or the black person, or the issues with women, with Ghanaian women and the men, and the what's the word? I'm thinking of the word, but the hierarchy is the patriarchy, excuse me, um, that's there with men and women. And so it really did bring back into reality that this is still colonization has really left its imprint um, on the continent itself too. So it really just reminded me that, like, okay, like, this is the world that's created here, and Africa is not just this like magical land where if all black people came here we would just be in good graces and everybody would get along. And so having realized that as well did motivate me and still continue to just push me forward and say, you know what, like, okay, so it's not that idealistic like I would want it, like I thought it to be. But one thing that it did provide me was definitely peace of mind. And having been able to live in a black world for just, for a moment, for 2 weeks, really, really allowed me a sense of peace. If there was anything else that whole trip gave me, was being able to like live in a world where like I don't have to be anybody else but myself, like, and be proud of my culture. And the only time that I think about white people, and the only time I think about, white people and their oppression and what they've done to us and like the history that goes with that, is when, you see a tourist come and something, it's like, then it's like, oh, okay. But other than that, it's like out of sight, out of mind. So that was definitely something that I needed. I needed to experience, and I definitely needed to hear, to bring it all back again. And not having that had discouraged me, but still provided me strength and motivation to like see myself living in Ghana and like, thinking outside the United States and thinking bigger. Like my whole world expanded. And I know, obviously I'm traveling, but like literally my whole world expanded. To think that like I can only ever live in the United States because this is the only life that I know to live. And apparently, like, compared to all other countries, this is the best life to live, was like, it was just very nice to like debunk that. And like, my parents also, side note, my parents are both from Haiti as well. So I've never been, I'm actually will be visiting Haiti next summer, but for the first time. So, I think, growing up in that environment too, I did have that experience where like my parents are from a different country. My grandfather still lives in Haiti. So, I feel like I do have a home outside the United States, but I had never experienced Haiti. So like just being in the US and in California specifically, and it getting smaller into where like what city you live in, like that's the world that I knew. And that's as far as I really thought that I'd ever be able to really go. So I say all that to say, just even every time I think about this trip, just all the feelings come back, all the emotions come back. It was just life changing, and I want to be able to pull as many of like people, my peers and black people that I know that would really appreciate this experience, and I would really like learn from this experience and have this moment to really see themselves a part of something larger, outside of a country that doesn't love who we are. I want to be able to bring more people to that, more black people to that, more of my community to that. And yeah, that was my trip. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much to Dr. Beverly Booker Ama, she was a great, like, she was the most perfect, just the most kind individual. I felt protected. I felt like I felt like God had sent her to us or with us on this trip, to really feel protected. And like as a guide. Like the trip was beautiful. It was seamless. Like I wouldn't change anything for the world. And I just I just can't thank Dr. Booker enough, and Howard University for being able to provide us, me and like my other two friends that came from Cal State Long Beach, this opportunity. And I'm so thankful for this collaboration, this partnership that's been started. And yeah, that was, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for watching. Subscribe. Oh, I'm just kidding. Bye.